Good afternoon, and welcome to the May 14, 2021 Governing Board Study Session. We are coming to you live from District 1 in the Community College District from our board retreat. Our first item on the agenda is our draft July 2021 to June 2025 strategic plan review. So I'm going to hand it over to Chancellor Lambert, and then he will introduce the presenter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. What we'd like to do is present to you the draft strategic plan. And one of the goals coming out of this is hopefully to be able to bring it to you in the June board meeting for final approval. Now, of course, if you're not comfortable with that, we understand. We want it to be right versus trying to get it done. So keep that in mind too. So I have Dr. Nick Richmond, Dr. Anthony Sovak, and I believe you might have some other folks there that you might want to introduce. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Nick.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Chancellor Lambert. Technical members of the board, Chancellor Lambert, colleagues and guests, thank you for giving us the time today to share with you the current draft of the strategic plan. As Chancellor Lambert mentioned, I'll be co-presenting today with Dr. Sovak, but there are others on the line who we may call upon depending on the questions that the board may have. So just to set the scene before we get started, the purpose of the plan is to outline institutional priorities for the next 4 years. And what we're going to do during this session today is give you a brief overview of the document and then open this up to discussion. And in particular, we're interested in your perspectives on the priorities currently captured within the draft plan. We would be interested to hear from you on any priorities that are not included that you would like to see within the plan. And also to hear about your perspectives on the key performance indicators. As we all know, the things we focus on and the things we measure can help drive the direction and areas of focus. And so we want to make sure that we hear from you on that topic as well. This draft was developed by the strategic planning team. This is the same group of people who've been working on the mission fulfillment framework, and development of this draft has really run in parallel with that mission review process. My thanks to the board for your consideration of the mission on Wednesday's regular board meeting, and thank you for approving those statements. And with this draft plan, we're taking that next step forward, building on those statements and figuring out what we need to do institutionally to move ourselves in the direction of the vision of the institution. How do we fulfill our purpose? And how do we ensure we're staying true to the mission of the institution? So within the document, and let me share my screen. Give me just a moment to move you around so I can make sure I can see everybody still. You'll see a number of different sections in the plan. It's a draft document, so you'll notice a few placeholders for things that are still under development, and there are a few other pieces we'll be incorporating as well. But you can see within here, central within this is the Achieve 60 Pima County goal, though we are under discussions on specific targets that we might look for over the next 4 years. While this is an important goal, it's one that continues to resonate with the planning team. This is a lofty goal, and we want to make sure that the targets we set for the institution are realistic and achievable, but with this as the aspirational end state that we're seeking to reach. We have a summary list of institutional KPIs, focusing on access, student progress, completion, and then some post-completion metrics associated with transfer or employment. And you will notice that where we can, we will disaggregate these data by race, ethnicity, gender, age, Pell status, and full-time, part-time status. We know, of course, that when we look at aggregate measures, they only tell part of the story. And with the institutional commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we want to make sure the institutional KPIs are disaggregating across those key populations who are important to the institution. There's currently a short introduction. I won't mention too much about this, except to highlight that we are recommending a change in the structure of the plan this time compared to previous plans. For the last probably 4 or 5 plans, we have grouped items by related theme, and that's important. And we have these 4 draft topics listed here. But what's more important is that we operationalize the things captured within this plan. And so we've structured it more as a high-level timeline listing priorities and the year within which they will complete. This is entirely motivated to ensure that we operationalize this. We think of it as a project plan. We commit to these deadlines, as opposed to what's sometimes been a little bit more fuzzy when we highlight things around a theme. But we are working through the strategic planning team to formalize groupings across the priorities, and we will communicate the plan in that way, as well as having these detailed steps by deadline. So you'll see that balance in the final version, but that's the reason why we switched this from group themes to this more timeline-based approach. There's also a discussion here about the planning philosophy. And again, there's a lot of detail. I'm not going to read through all of this, but what I want to highlight is the college's increasing focus on ensuring we are integrating across our plans. This may be something that board members have heard directly. I've certainly heard it extensively internally, that we have multiple sets of priorities at Pima. And what we're looking to do through the strategic plan is pull those things together in one integrated place. So with the work underway reviewing the EMP and the FMP, the strategic planning team will look at those documents once final recommendations are approved, and we will weave those priorities that fall within this timeline into this plan. Likewise, for the work being done by the Breaking Student Barriers Task Force, we will weave that in as that work wraps up. So we will have one central source of priorities. Those priorities will then connect to the Chancellor's goals each year, and we will review this plan each year. So there's opportunity to pivot and make adjustments in this rapidly changing environment in which we live. And you can read through and you'll see more details about that and kind of how we plan to implement this new plan. There's a statement in here related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is one of the key areas that we want to prioritize through the strategic plan. Of course, there are others, and they are summarized in that plan philosophy section. But diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a key focus at the institution for a long time. Chancellor Lambert, one of the components of the North Star that you've spoken about regularly. And we want to make sure, and this is different from last time where we had a strategic plan and a separate diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. We want DEI woven into the strategic plan, as well as developing that more detailed plan focused on that area. So that's why you see that language in here. And it's provided directly by our diversity officer, and thanks to Ilda Ladner for providing this content for us. And I will skip these two sections because they are in development. And what I'd like to do now is move into the timeline. What we'll do is spend a few moments briefly talking about each of these different years, and then we'll open this up to discussion and input from the board. And for the first year of priorities, it's my pleasure to hand you over to Dr. Sobak, who has been my co-chair of the strategic planning team.
Hey, that's me. Thanks, Nick. So for the priorities, these priorities, it helps. I just reiterate that we're all sort of focused on that Achieve 60 goal. So these are the things that we need to do to kind of get there. And especially in the first year, we're looking at things that will set the stage for success in later years. Just because something's not listed here doesn't mean that we aren't working towards it. Again, it's sort of listed by like the end date. So by the end of no later than June 30th, we were looking to, refocus, reevaluate, align the planning processes as Nick was talking about. And these are some of the things that we're thinking that will do that. So prioritizing high quality customer service and learner engagement, carrying out a college-wide review of existing unit priorities and processes. That second one has come up time and again, especially when we're doing the mission review work, that we have a lot, we're doing so much. So what can we stop doing so that we can start doing this other work? And there's a list of what that might look like underneath. Continuing enhancements to the guide and pathways with year one priorities, including program maps and degree works, implementation, review and apply program viability targets to close programs that do not meet community employer needs, to redistribute the resources to support in-demand areas. That's something that we've often talked about at boards meetings, but also, would be the time to do it would be the first year, so that those priorities and those resources can be distributed to meet the Achieve 60 goals. Continue with the adoption of OER resources and reduced cost educational materials, and making sure that those lower cost options are clearly identified for students. Developing, and then the next one is, next couple are developing those plans and making sure that they are kind of aligned with the strategic plan, the strategic enrollment plan, the diversity, equity, inclusion plan, a climate action plan, and how all of the other units can kind of align with those planning processes. Did I miss anything, Nick, or would you like to go right to year 2?
Yeah, let's jump straight into year 2. Let me scroll down a little bit. So within year 2,
Can I stop you for a second, just to underscore something? So the chancellor's goals that we discussed earlier, you notice that some of those items are linked right into this. So again, as Nick was talking about, is that greater integration between all of our planning efforts. So we're all clearly moving in the same direction. Go ahead, Nick.
okay, thank you, Chancellor. So the goals that we have listed currently, draft goals for completion in the second year. So as Anthony mentioned, these are things that we would start in the first year, but complete in year 2. Include rebuilding learner-facing and community-facing processes with a focus on standardization, simplification, access, and removing barriers. This is something we've heard through multiple channels, partly through the discussions that led to the development of this plan, but through survey responses that come to my office. We have some processes that don't work as well for our students as we need them to. And so we want to focus on that because we think it's important for access and retention. There's an additional set of enhancements to guided pathways in year 2. So this is a theme you will see in multiple years in the plan. And then we're also seeking to restructure offerings around areas of interest. Now, the institution has areas of interest through the guided pathways process, but oftentimes for the institution, people need to know when they engage with us. So they're looking for adult education. Are they looking for an industry credential? We are not as transparent and easy to understand from the outside as we might want to be. And this is about that next step of pulling credit, non-credit, related pieces, different completion points under those areas of interest so that we're easier to understand from outside the institution and students can be drawn to the subject area of interest and then see the program and pathway options for them within there. We're looking to expand completion points to include industry credentials and micro-credentials. This has, in some respects, is already underway at the institution through some of the work that Dr. Rourke is leading with the Community College Growth Engine Fund, but we want to push that wider for the institution. And also focusing on reverse transfer and auto confer. These are really important initiatives to help support student completion. And so those are things we see as really important opportunities for the institution to support completion of our students. We want to expand those on-ramps to the institution that we know are demonstrating good levels of success. Dual enrollment, we know we're enjoying significant growth here, and I could talk at length about the advantages of dual enrollment for our students. I won't for time reasons, but it's an important pathway. IBEST programs, we know see good levels of success for our students, and so we want to build out that as well. And prior learning assessment provides a lot of opportunities for our students from diverse backgrounds to kind of accelerate their way through their programs with the institution by recognizing those experiences before they came to us. So those 3 things have been identified as important on-ramps to our pathways and things that we can build further and enhance further. And then there's an ongoing theme throughout the plan of strengthening our operations. Anthony spoke about part of that, reviewing unit processes, but we also need to look at our technology. Do we have the right technology to support specific business processes? Is that technology integrated? Are there ways we can simplify? And not to say we have to change things, but we need to review that and we need to carefully consider that. And that's something we have in year 2 of the plan.
Yeah, and if I might, Nick, I think if the first year is we're setting the stage, the second year, all of the important actors are coming out. And if you look at the things, you talked about reverse transfer, auto confer, expanding completion points to include industry credentials and micro credentials. We're defining what those terms of success for Achieve 60 are. I think we originally had the technology needs in year one as part of setting that stage, but we just decided that it was too important because it would be defined by the presence of those actors, that we would probably wouldn't be done until the second year. So, setting the stage and then getting all of the actors out there.
Absolutely, that's great clarification. Thank you, Anthony. And do you want to take it away with year 3?
Yeah, because I now got to try and carry the metaphor through the whole planning process, right? Well, here I guess we're practicing and we're fine tuning. At the end of year 3, we have transformed how we engage with adult learners, expanding relevant offerings, building out our alumni processes, and clearly communicating the value of education. We have committed to a culture of innovation, including professional development, formation of an innovation team, and the establishment of an innovation center. We've completed the enhancements to the guided pathways work that was present in the previous 2 years, and continue to identify and address equity gaps. And then this one, it is to expand the capacity to work effectively across operational units and assess resource utilization across the college, identifying roadblocks to progress resulting from limited resources and to determine solutions. So that's kind of where we're saying, are there gappages? Could we be moving? Could we be nimble? How can we be nimble is basically what we're doing there. And as you notice, as we're coming out there, the priorities kind of get smaller and shorter in length, because we will be continuing to reassess what our priorities are throughout, and I'm sure that we will have more. Is that right, Nick?
Absolutely. So we're very mindful of workload. We need to be realistic, and it's actually been part of the interesting planning work on this. Some members of the planning team are arguing we should try and do everything in 2 years because these things are all important, but there's only so much time. So we've had to try and prioritize and be realistic about how certain long things will take us. But with the 3 plans being developed in year 1 that will be institution-wide in scope, we know we need to save staff capacity for later years to be able to focus on the priorities identified there. And we need to be ready to pivot. The world will look different 2 years from now, and we need to make sure we're not overcommitting ourselves now for that point in time, so we can pivot and adjust when we need to. Within the final year, we have only 2 things that are currently marked for completion this year, and this will bring us to the end of the plan. The first is reinventing the learner payment structure. Now, to explain what we mean by this just a little bit, and this was actually, one of these was an example that Anthony brought forward. We looked at a few. We could argue as a community college that we're a relatively affordable option compared to other higher education pathways. But while we are relatively affordable, we're still not affordable to a lot of students. When you don't have resources, $50, $60 is a lot of money. And when you need to feed your family or you need to pay your rent, there isn't always the luxury of being able to pay that for an education. And we have looked at a number of different options of how this could be approached to rethink how we charge for programs at the institution to see if there are ways we can make this more affordable. One option, which is the one listed here, is considering flat rates by program. So there is a clear flat rate for students for a given award that they're seeking. So there's no question about what the cost will be, to include book costs, to include tuition costs. So it's locked in when they start and they know what they're committing to. There are other initiatives, for example, one from Arizona Western, which is the one that Anthony brought forward to the planning team, where students are reimbursed for out-of-pocket expenses on successful completion. Now that has significant implications to the foundation and fundraising. And we have Marcia Euler as a member of the planning team, precisely so we can speak with her, leverage her expertise as we consider these options. It's become clear through the conversations with different stakeholder groups that this one in particular has really resonated with the members of the college community as really important for the students we serve. What the right route forward is, we don't know, but we do know that this should be assessed, considered, and the institution should invest time and effort in determining what route forward we might proceed with that's going to make an education through Pima more accessible for the diverse students that we serve.
If I might, Nick, just to reemphasize, when we were talking, when we had the student panel, and even in the comments from students, the word silo met with a lot of confusion. So we ended up replacing it with work units. But the idea of working collaborative was a slightly esoteric, but they all got behind the idea of how do we make college more affordable, at that point, or and so that was why it was presented there. And I just wanted to reemphasize that that's where their passions were ignited, is when, I want to do this, how can I do this?
Yeah, this one has resonated with students, and we sent out a survey related to the plan. We had about 250 student responses. There was a lot of energy around this particular topic. And then the other item we have to wrap up this year, though, it really is a completion connecting a number of items in earlier years, is the full implementation college-wide of an effectiveness process. To be the institution that this community deserves, we need to make sure we have optimum processes, so we are not wasting time or effort or resources on ineffective processes or things that don't really meet the needs of our students. And that's a big process, but we're looking to complete it during the lifetime of this plan, or at least that's a current draft goal within this plan. So this is where we currently stand in terms of the content. I will stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other again. And at this point, I'd like to open this up to input from the board. Do you agree with the priorities as listed here? Is there anything that we have missed or clarification we can provide? What do you think?
Yes.
Well, I have a question on, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I would just talk loud.
So I guess on this flat rate program, so what I'm understanding is that there'd be one payment structure and everything would be included. And how would you go about getting the payment on that? Because I would assume that Nassau's not going to pay it that way. So does that mean the school's going to give a loan, or? That's one question. Second one is completion. How you recover the money if they don't. I think these are great plans. I'm really impressed by this. But I'm just wondering how the college is going to collect the money.
And to speak to that, that's a great question. And that's one of the reasons we actually put this in year 4 of the plan, because there's a lot of practicalities that would have to be determined to figure out, first, what options would bring value to our students. So first, that's the primary focus, but then of those, which ones can we operationalize in a way that won't be overly burdensome from an administrative point of view, that does not in any way conflict with how the FAFSA structure works, because we want to ensure the students, of course, can continue to use FAFSA to obtain financial resources. And I don't know the answer to any of your questions, but they are great ones that really drove us to putting this in the last year, because we're going to need time to research this, investigate it, and make sure we can do this in a way that will work for the students and not create any internal issues at the institution in terms of how we might implement it.
So let me tell you say one more thing. I think that the flat rate program is great. And probably if you guys could come up with a payment plan that was consistent by month or something that they could budget, would be a great idea. And the flat rate, I'm not, I like that one for the people that are not accountable. They don't complete their courses, but they own the money. So I don't know.
Ms. Garcia, I think to your point also, and I think to what Richmond was saying, I think if the federal government decides to make college free, it changes the formula too.
That's right.
This plan has to continue to be responsive to be able to address sort of the changing environment around us.
I would add to that. So there are different models already out there. So I think it's Georgia Tech that said, we're going to give you a computer science bachelor's degree for X price. And that's all it's going to cost you. So that's one model of flat rate. We would have to find out how do they actually do that, right? Then you have another model where you can do all you want in a single year, and this is all you pay. Wow. So if you finish it all in that first year, that's all you ever pay. Now, however, if you don't finish it and you go into the second year, now you're getting charged again for that. So there's different models out there, and we would need to investigate them to see what seems to make no sense. But again, if there's free community college, well,
Right,
that
that
changes.
changes it. But you would still have to, I would hope that we would still ensure that the students would be held responsible, you know, right? We don't want to waste anybody's money. Right. Okay.
Are there any other comments? Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. This is really wonderful. I'm all about strategies, so thanks for all the hard behind the scenes work that I'm sure went into this. And I'm also sure as you program manage this, that there will be self-imposed metrics and milestones, for instance, to achieve 60% by 2030. Those are very precise numbers. So at some point in the future, it'd be great for us to just kind of see the milestones that you set for yourself on how we're going to do that between now and 2030, which is just, you know, not that far away. But yeah, it would be great to see that again as you go. But for right now, thank you for all of this work. It's a great start.
That's great, thank you. And one of the things we're looking to do with this is the board uses currently for the Chancellor's goals with the tracking metrics that we have and the dashboards that we post now through the website. We'll build something similar for the strategic plan, both on the project management side and also to track the key performance indicators. So there will be clear public visibility of the progress the institution is making. So we're very committed to building accountability into this process to ensure we move forward.
And one more thing, just because we're at this retreat, as you know, is I look forward to seeing how we cross over and work together with the communications team, the enrollment teams, and the marketing teams, because it seems like this is going to cross over into a lot of departments to make this happen. So I look forward to seeing that. Thanks.
Are there other comments from the board on the draft?
So I would just add, it seems like we're sort of comments are wrapping up, but I would add, Dr. Richmond, I think tying this and continuing the strategic planning around the Chief 60 is very smart. I think that we've been at the forefront of championing that initiative, and I think connecting that aspirational goal to where we're going is really key to the success of our region and our state. So I want to thank you for the wisdom in continuing to do that, and Chancellor Lambert as well. And I want to acknowledge the inclusion of the diversity, equity, and inclusion component. I think that's so key in putting that up front and where it's located is just we really heard from this board our commitment to those values, and we've seeing it up front and center, providing those definitions that the complement. So thank you for that. In other words, I think it looks like really an aspirational roadmap that we can really use to chart the coming years to really provide guidance and leadership to this institution. Thank you. Okay, is there anything else? Okay, thank you guys so much. Okay, our next item is the fiscal year 2022 budget discussion, the comprehensive strategies and funding for the strategic plan 2021-2025 and college priorities.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm so pleased to have Dr. Dave B here to really take us into a deeper dive around our compensation strategies, as well as how we might support resource-wise that strategic plan that you just saw earlier. So Dave, why don't you go ahead and take us through?
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Can you see that slide well enough where you are?
Can you put it in full screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That better?
Yep.
Okay. Well, good afternoon again. It's been a long time since, a day and a half ago. And as Chancellor Lambert mentioned, this is an opportunity for us to really dig in, particularly to talk about compensation, following up on the board presentation on the budget the other day. So I'm going to dig in, talk about a number of things, sort of touch base on things. Obviously, if you have any questions, let me know as we're going. It would be nice to have an interactive conversation. Per the materials that we posted, I have made some changes today just to give you a heads up. So it's going to be a little bit, the order's a little bit different, and I've added a little bit of content, and so I'll walk you through all of that. So what we will hit on today is really the context and considerations related to the compensation, talking about the expenditure projections for the salary increases, touch on employee benefits. We're not going to talk a whole lot about employee benefits, but just as I was mentioning the other day in the culture of care presentation, compensation is really a combination of how we fund different things for employees. It's salaries, plus it's the benefits that we provide. And we'll touch on that a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about what inflation has been, because I know that there's been some communication about inflation and how we have or haven't kept pace with inflation. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I think one of the key things to keep in mind with the context is that we're coming out of a really challenging period of time for the college, beginning really in fiscal year 09 up until now. We've had a series of budget reductions where the state funding went away. Then we've had significant enrollment declines. And then on top of that, then compounded with the expenditure limitation challenges. So we have to keep in mind that we have been prioritizing, in my opinion, compensation all the way along. Some years that means that we did the best we could was to keep people whole with the increased costs of medical. Sometimes it was giving what would be moderate salary increases. There were a couple of years where we didn't give salary increases, but those were the same years that we were eliminating positions, and we had a few positions, handful of positions that were we had layoffs. That number, we were able to keep it relatively small, but that is part of the holistic context that we have to look at the compensation history. Then we'll talk a little bit more, and I mentioned it the other day, the proposed adjustments for the upcoming budget year, and then talk a touch about the class comp study and what that means, how it works, and what we'll be looking at, and we'll be talking about in the next number of months. And then I have a couple of slides talking about the strategic plan and how we fund those items. Okay. Touching on employee compensation, this is the slide where we touch on the increases that we've done on the benefit side. So as I mentioned the other day, we are absorbing an increased cost of a little more than $500,000 in employee medical benefits. So that is not going to impact employees through their premiums at all. That's totally funded by the college. In addition to that, we've improved the short-term disability program through the board approval a couple of months ago. And then the increase in funding for the liability that we have outstanding for the public safety retirement system. So all told, those were increases that we had to absorb within the budget of about $2 million. The right-hand side shows what years we gave actual salary increases and what the level of those increases were. And I have that in a slide later as well. So we'll talk about it when I talk about the consumer price index changes and inflation. What we do when we're talking about the budget is a lot like what we do with the budget as a whole. We start with the base budget. That's where we're at right now. That includes the commitments that we have with our current employees, the contracts that we're expecting, and we budget for vacant positions to be filled unless, and in this case, we actually have a number of positions that we're looking to eliminate through vacancies through attrition. There's a total of 30 between the current year and next year that we'll be eliminating. So we fold those in and build the budget up. That includes also, there are adjustments that happen during the year. So this isn't like a static process that only gets adjusted once a year. There are things that happen during the year. And there are a couple that are important considerations on the faculty side that each year when a faculty member, the faculty members get placed on their salary schedules in terms of what placement they are, in terms of what step they start at, based on the number of years of teaching experience or equivalent experience they had prior to being hired. And what was happening a number of years ago is that folks were getting hired and placed at a step higher than employees who were at the college but hadn't gotten step increases over that time. So what we did is we worked with the faculty and developed a process whereby we just automatically do that every year, that if a faculty member who is below the maximum number of placement steps has gained a year or two of experience that would get them into the next category, we automatically fold that into the budget and into their contract for the next year. So that's an increase this year of $42,000. That's a pretty normal amount given for each year. And this eliminates the possibility that we'll have what was known as leapfrogging. That's how it was referred to when it was being discussed. So we have a process whereby we automatically make that change. In addition, faculty have the ability to have educational attainment adjustments. That is that there's different pay grades depending on their level of education. If they have just a master's degree, if they have a master's degree plus, I think it's 18 credits, and then there are 5 different grades that go up to having a doctorate or a PhD. And if they are continuing their education while they're teaching for us, and they attain those different levels, they get increases, they apply for the increases, and they get that. Just so you know that amounts to, typically in a given year, it's somewhere between like 6 and 10. The increases are around 5%. So it's important. Reason I'm saying this is that there are ways that people get pay increases during the year that aren't just based on this annual salary allocation that we're talking about, and that the college makes those commitments and folds it into the base. And that faculty educational attainment, that is not a similar, there's not a similar ability on the staff side or the administrator side. That's purely for faculty. So if a staff member goes and they get an MBA, they don't just turn around and get a salary increase. That there's not a component in our salary program to do that. Just so you know, so there's a little bit of difference between staff and faculty and how that works. There are position review adjustments so that if someone is in a position and they're substantively doing different work, they can put in a request, and if an HR reviews it based on the type of work they're doing, and if they can get the position reclassified. In a given year, that is in the neighborhood of it can be about 20 positions in that neighborhood that happen during the course of the year. And again, when we start up the budget the next year, once those have happened, those adjustments happen in the current year, and then we have to change the budget for the next year. And then obviously we also do the same thing with retirements, recruitments, position adjustments. Normally that a retirement and then the recruitment, normally that results in a reduction in salary obligation, because you typically have someone retiring from the high end of the salary scale, and then you hire someone at the low end, and the amount that is saved goes into the college's ability to fund compensation increases as a whole going forward in the next budget year, or it helps the budget. Okay, and then the last part of this page is just, again, this is rehashing something that we've talked about a number of times. 1% increase for all of our regular employees totals $1.1 million. A 1.0 1% increase, similar increase for the adjunct faculty load rate is about $200,000. That includes the fringe benefits associated with it. So there are additional costs as salaries go up, and you have to factor that in as well. Looking at some of the key metrics that we look at, and I'm not going to go into these slides too much detail, but these are key metrics from a sustainability standpoint that we look at every year. How is our staff size related to our enrollment as an institution? So the red line there is the FTSE enrollment, along with what we're estimating 21 to be. That's the downturn because of the COVID pandemic. And then what we've built the budget on is a bounce back to about 95% of what the prior fiscal year was. So hopefully that bounce back happens. Again, we built the budget that way. If we don't realize that, there are cost control mechanisms that are built in that will reduce the budget expenditures associated with that. But when you look at this next slide, you see why we really track on this. So if this is the combination of all the personnel costs of the college, and then projecting out what the current year is, and then what the budget is, or what those little dots are. And then you can see that our salaries right now are slotted to increase pretty steadily this year and next year in the budget. And they are not doing so in alignment with where our enrollment trend is. So that's just something to be aware of. That's a sustainability issue. And what is enabling us to do that is we have basically twofold. Is the passage of 481 is enabling us to do this. Otherwise, we would have to be reducing positions and other expenses. And then the other thing that we've talked at length about is the additional, the funding coming from the federal government that is really going to help and bridge this gap until we have the marijuana money coming in is going to help. And then our ability to use increasing tax revenues through the 481 will help going forward. So we're really looking at a period where we're coming out of a very difficult time to manage our personnel expenses into a time where things are starting to look brighter, and it will look very bright if our enrollment bounces back and starts growing again. So those are things that sort of scale and what the salary is for those positions. So the chief, the ELT type positions, and then the deans are identified in all of the colleges in that salary survey put in what deans are. So it's a way for us to sort of base where we're at with the market for within the community college structure. And that is not the only thing we do, because HR uses other survey tools that tracks salaries versus market study. And that's really big. That is a big component of what the class comp study is doing. It's going to be identifying what positions we have, looking at what the market for those types of positions are, and then recommending salary scales, a new structure for us to manage more effectively. So we have a program that's in place. It's just antiquated and has sort of degraded over time. And it's time to reset it and develop it for what the college's priorities are going forward with compensation and its compensation philosophy and so forth. We talked to employees and employee groups about compensation during the year. The first one that's highlighted is one of the ideas coming out of the CARES Act was can we add in a benefit that the student loan repayment assistance, that the CARES Act enabled employers to create a benefit for employees where they could pay employees tax-free and for the employees to pay down their student loans. And the max on that is tied to the same amount that employers can give in tax-free tuition benefit. So we looked into this program, and it actually doesn't work very well for the college because that it is, one, it's primarily set up as a tax, it doesn't come with funding, so the college has to fund that program. And then on top of that, when the key benefit that the federal government is providing is they're giving up the potential tax revenue from something, and so the benefit is would be realized by the employee who gets to pay down their student loan debt tax free, and then the employer can take a tax deduction on it, but we don't pay federal taxes, so it does not help the college. And so what it really would amount to is in order for us to participate in that program, we'd have to use the same pool of money that we have available for compensation increases to create that benefit. And then the only individuals who would benefit from it are those who have qualified student loan debt. And we know, looking at a cross-section of our employees, that wouldn't be an equitable way to provide compensation to our employees. And so we talked to that, and I've talked to the employee groups to explain why this doesn't work. I wish it worked a different way, because we had a really interesting idea that if it worked more like deferred income, kind of like our voluntary retirement plans, it would be a very attractive program where we could give the potential for an employee to choose some of their salary increase and then divert it towards paying down their student loan debt, and they could potentially get that pre-tax, but it does not work that way. So, maybe I'll make a phone call to some of our legislative people in Washington and try and push that idea, because I think it would be a really good way for folks to be able to pay down their student loan debt and get us out of what is really a national crisis. Anyway, so I've explained that. And then one of the feedbacks we got, a piece of feedback that we got from employees, was the idea of proportional increases and having a way to give bigger increases to our lower income employees. And so that's where the combination of lifting the scales for everybody, but also providing this supplemental amount, a flat rate supplement, actually has that effect. And I'll show you in a second what that kind of looks like and why that matters a fair amount. We also talked about stipends for work at home costs and things like that, but you know, we're moving back to an on-site delivery. There will be a remote work policy developed. I don't expect that it's going to have a significant financial component to it because there are advantages to working from home. You cut significantly on your gas costs and time spent commuting and things like that. But nevertheless, it is something that we've talked with employees about. And then this last bullet point is just, you know, what I've already said a couple of times, which is the key to what we're doing with the budget is ensuring that, you know, long-term stewardship of the finances of the college, not overly committing to what might be something that turns south in the future, that we have a program built in that we can sustain going forward. Okay, so in the budget, we talked about the other day.
Dr. B, I think we just lost your audio.
What did you do?
Dr. B, we should probably text.
Do they still hear us?
Can you hear us?
Just text me. Text me if you can hear us. There he is.
Dr. B, we lost.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, could you stop hearing me? Is that what happened?
Yes,
We can hear you
Okay,
now.
how long did that go?
just a few seconds, Dave.
Okay. So something happened because I can see it on the screen. Something weird is happening and I got muted. So anyway, at least this time I saw it relatively quickly. So in the budget that we talked about the other day, we have put into the budget the ability for $5.5 million increases for salaries and wages. As I talked about, it includes a 2% increase in salary scale. So that lifts people's base salaries by 2%, and then plus that $1,000. We also folded in increasing for our regular employees the minimum wage to $15 an hour. That only affects a small number of people at the A11 level. But we thought that in light of the conversation that's going on across the country, that it would be nice to at least have our regular salary schedule start at that $15 level. I think that's a conversation going forward about non-classified positions, so temporary positions going forward, but there's a much bigger commitment when we get into that. And I think that in the course of the next year, we'll probably be talking about that for next year. And then the last item on this, and I alluded to this the other day when I talked about in that culture of care presentation, the idea of a day of relief. And I said that we need to talk about it in the study session because there's a financial commitment to it. That for staff to get an additional day off, like a floating day of leave, doesn't cost the college any additional money. It costs the college in terms of lost productivity because they're not working that day. But it doesn't come an additional cost. For faculty, however, if we give that day of relief, it amounts to, for most faculty, it would be an extra day of accountability for this upcoming year, not a day of accountability. So they would be essentially paid for 170 days, but the days of accountability would remain 169. And that amounts to an increased cost that we had pulled into this budget of about $120,000. So it's not a huge amount. I think it would go a long way when we're talking about the impacts that have occurred for our faculty and staff. But this one does come at a cost because we would have to provide additional compensation and fold that into how those contracts are structured for faculty. So that is the day of relief idea. Yep.
So can you go back to the other slide real quick? Just two things I just want to emphasize. So the lift to A11 classification, that's really just for our regular permanent employees. That is not applying to our temporary hourly employees. It would if they are. It would impact people who are part-time employees. So it could impact people who are not benefits eligible, but they would have to be at that put on that scale. So they would be, if someone is hired in a temporary way to perform that job. So those are like a groundskeeper job is I think that's one of the jobs.
again, there aren't very many of them, but if someone is hired temporarily by the college, that they would be hired in at that minimum rate. But there are a number of non-classified positions like tutors and things like that that are temporary in nature, and it would not impact those.
Thank you. And then on the adjunct faculty, I know we had looked at trying to get to on par with Maricopa. So how does 870, where does that get us compared to Maricopa?
It's a little bit lower than what their increase is that they're looking at. So it probably keeps that, it makes that gap a little bit bigger. Not significantly, but a little bit bigger. If I remember right, we are either second or third in the state, and I'd have to go back and take a little bit bigger look at that. In terms of what we were trying to do, and it's another one of the considerations that all of these things become more complicated when you take a look at them, is that if we lift the adjunct rate significantly different from the other salaries, we have other positions, part-time instructor positions that are not on the faculty scale, but they do instructor work. And if you lift the adjunct faculty rate significantly higher than the regular rate that goes up, then some people get paid more than others who do sort of similar jobs. So I mean, it's not a huge problem if they're close, but if it's a big difference, it can create a little bit of a disparity.
Thank you.
Okay, this slide looks at as I mentioned, the consumer price index over time, because I know that was shared recently. So this is a consumer price, urban wage, and clerical workers measure, which is the one I typically use. And it's indexed to 2014. The bars, the columns going up in the chart are the years that we've given increases. So it's been, you can see it's somewhat sporadic. There were a couple of years, 2016, 17, and 19. We didn't give increases. A couple of years we gave bigger increases than the cost of living indexes have gone up. Now, this is not me saying that this is something that we're in great shape because we've been similar to the consumer price index. What this is really saying is that our increases have been very, we've done everything we could. We've really kind of kept pace with inflation. But inflation has also been really low recently, and that is turning around now. April's number was up about 4+%, and hopefully that will cool down a little bit. But over the last number of years, we've been relatively close to the consumer price index. But again, that means that people aren't gaining versus just inflation. They're sort of staying flat or staying stagnant versus the cost of living. This next slide shows what the budget was last year to this year, and it shows it by the different personnel categories. And one of the reasons I wanted to show this is that when you put all, oh yeah, is there a question?
Not from us.
No. Okay. I have been hearing things all week apparently, so sorry. So one of the things that with the presentation that we gave the other day was that there was the slide that was the general fund slide was pulled out, and then the comparison was made of the administrator salaries year over year versus how many administrators there were. And one of the reasons why there was a big increase year over year, or, relatively, it wasn't a big increase because it's still a small part of the pie, but a relatively big increase year over year in the general fund is that we have two administrator positions, the adult education vice president position and a workforce position that shifted from the designated funds over to the general fund. So the reason I wanted to show this slide is that this is the all fund slide, and the difference is smaller and the number of positions is slightly different. But this tells it a little bit more accurately. And then the other thing, and this shows it, I think, gets to some of the points that have been made really clearly. So this is looking from 2016 to the upcoming budget. The number of administrator positions has decreased from 57 down to well under 50. I think that it actually is closer to, it might be as low as 45 by the time the year goes through. And then the comment was also that, and then you can see the salaries on their bottom part. One of the reasons that instructional salaries have gone down as a total significantly in the last couple of years is because there were a number of positions that are these academic support positions, counselor positions, where the positions were shifted from being labeled as faculty to being, they're now full exempt staff positions. And when that happens, the cost for those, the budget for those gets pulled out and put into the other category. And so when you take those out, the drop in instructional faculty salaries is not as significant as what has been pointed out in the other information that you've received. And the other thing that's also important to understand is that while we've reduced the number of administrative jobs, the responsibility of administrators has basically stayed the same. So while there have been adjustments for administrator positions, it's because a number of people took on significantly greater responsibilities because they were absorbing the work of a bunch of other positions. Now, with the faculty side, the other piece that's unfortunate because our enrollment has been going down is that we have almost completely through attrition reduced the number of faculty positions, which is one of the reasons that the instructional faculty salary line is going down. And again, we have a ratio that if enrollment bounces back up, we'll start adding back in positions. We have a mechanism to do that. But this isn't just a function of deciding to shift a lot of resources from instruction into administration. That's not what is happening. Even though we have made salary adjustments for a number of administrative positions, you can see on that bottom part down here is that the overall costs have not been going up. So we've been keeping that relatively flat and making those adjustments within the same pool. Okay, talk a little bit about class.
Dr. B, I think we have a question.
Yeah.
The administrators, does that include the vice chancellors?
Yes.
Yes.
And how many did we increase?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Three.
Three positions.
So we took, in our earlier conversation where I talked about how I promoted up compliance to cabinet level vice chancellor. I took the research and planning to vice chancellor, and I took legal to vice chancellor. That's what that is. So there were already 3 lines, so it's an incremental adjustment, but then they inherited more responsibility for that.
Okay, what was the total salary increase for those?
I don't remember the total number for those. Do you remember, Dave?
Total, let's see. I don't think I have that on me. I think it's less than 100,000. I think for all 3 of them, I believe. And again, it wasn't creating 3 new positions. It was changing the positions and what the responsibilities were.
We can send that number out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we can get that information for you.
Send that out in the next day or two.
I mean, I know that it's, it may be necessary, but I think that to appease the other people is, I'm not sure. I'm just asking. Do you think that perhaps that they should be told what those additional job responsibilities are? I don't know. Okay, because so we can stop this fight.
We'll do a better job.
Yes.
Hi, yes, hi, Dr. B, I have a question too. So I think that also it's our responsibility here as a board to ask the question. There was a presentation that was submitted at the last minute at the board meeting by the PCC and I just would like to know at a top level here, and we can get into detail later if need be privately, but how in this presentation that you're giving us now, or in another one, are you going to address their concerns? Because it is the faculty, and they did have some serious concerns. And you are the experts. How are those being addressed? And if it's a matter of understanding, like you said, these are not apples and oranges, how do you understand the line items? Thanks. Sorry if that's not very clear.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You know, what I've done, and that's part of what I was adding in, is making sure that I'm addressing some of the points that were made by those presentations. I can assure you that they are, without any hesitation, I'm sure they are listening to this right now. Part of it is that, you know, they're making a pitch. And one of the things that I want to say is that I find when looking at the information, creating this adversarial structure where it sort of pits faculty versus administration, I think is a little bit unfortunate. But what I would say is that the point that they're trying to make is that compensation is becoming an issue, and there's no dispute and there's no difference of opinion between that. So, you know, I can certainly advocate for what the point is, which is that they like our employees on the staff side, really have endured a long period of time without significant compensation increases on the average or as a whole. And that, you know, and that's where I'm saying, looking forward, I think we can be kind of optimistic, and you know, I'm happy that this year we can kind of make some headway. If 481 hadn't passed, we would be having a very different conversation, and it would be a lot less pleasant than this. And so part of it is just talking about how we look at it. You know, a lot of it is using data to try and to create to have influence on what a decision is, which is great, because the data it looked like they were using data that we provide, so there's not really a dispute, and they ask us for data and we provide it. But there's also, you can interpret data in a lot of different ways, and some of it is okay, well, that isn't exactly what you're saying, isn't exactly what was happening. The issue, the biggest one of dispute is not really, I think, the administrative line so much as the factoring in that a number of that the faculty line has dropped significantly because a number of positions have moved into other categories. And so that one to me is the one that really sticks out. And like I said, I'm sure they're listening to me, and I talk to them pretty routinely about this kind of stuff. So we'll follow up with them as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you talked to them. Yeah, and again, I'm trying to understand it, and I don't know if it's, I think they were averaging the salary, so it wasn't purely a matter of number of faculty versus number of admin and versus number of staff.
It was both, yeah. They did all of the above, yeah.
It's the average, and we just need to be very, as a board, I just want to assure everyone that, you know, we are looking at that, and if it requires extra time to go over this in another meeting with the PCC EA, I would appreciate that if the finance team would do that, because it's not, I don't think it's adversarial as much as it is when an admin person gets an increase from, say, $120,000 to $150,000. It's a big difference between a staff person making $20,000 a year and going up to $22,000 a year. So that's where the concern is, and we need to respect that and acknowledge that and not minimize it. That's all I want to say.
So, and we appreciate that, and we are sensitive to that. So what I'll have Dave do is sit down and meet with PCCA, go through and do a point-by-point comparison, because he did speak to some of those elements. So Dave, just make sure you do that before the June board meeting.
Of course.
Okay. But we are, so
yeah, and like I said,
do more, and we're so pleased that we can start doing more now because we're in a better place. But it's going to be hard to close gaps, just given where we are.
Well, and I think that reinforcing the point of, like, we have a lot in common. I mean, it's like, what I was saying is I don't see this as adversarial. I think that we all have a similar interest in mind. And an example of that is, you know, hearing the faculty, you know, talk about the burnout and the comments and getting the feedback from them, and compensation was mentioned a number of times. And that's why the day of relief concept, which actually will have a positive financial impact for them, for faculty in particular, I think it's kind of a cool idea. I think it's attractive to address and recognize that we are hearing what you're saying. We understand what's going on, or, you know, and we're trying to do what we can about it. Speaking of doing what we can about it, and we will be talking a lot this coming year about class. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So could you just clarify just a little bit more so we're fully clear? The day of relief, is that really conceived as so it's a day off, but is it conceived as sort of a floating holiday, or how is it actually conceived in how it would be actualized?
Yeah, so again, this is where it's a little bit different for staff and faculty, and that's not because we intend to make it different between faculty and staff. It has to do with who's on contracts. And so what's happening, we were talking about it and we're like, well, it'd be nice to give everybody a day off just to recognize, hey, just take a day, do what you want to do, and just get some relief from having endured this really difficult period of time. So in a normal world, it'd be nice we could have done it the same for everybody, but it doesn't work the same way for faculty, because particularly right now, faculty are just finishing up their semester. If you tried to say, take a day off now, they would probably lose their minds on us, because obviously this is their most difficult time of the year.
So Dave, I think if I understand the question, is it a day that the employee gets to decide in a year which day they're going to take? So in other words, not everybody's going to take the same day in the same week or the same month. It's kind of some flexibility.
Right. Right. Yeah. Sorry. And sorry for rambling, but so yeah, with staff, we're envisioning that this would happen in the summer, but that they would work with their supervisor so that they could be planned, and it's not like all of a sudden everybody's gone the same day and we close. And then for faculty, because they're off contract, that's why it becomes a pay issue, because the only way to give them sort of the equivalent of a day would be to pay them an extra day. Which amounts to a little more than 5% equivalent to annual pay. Hopefully that answered the question better. Sorry. Okay, moving forward, and this is one of the things that's going to be really important going forward, is really recalibrating our classification and compensation system, and looking at ensuring that our positions are paid appropriately versus market rates, that we have a really effective salary scale program. With staff in particular, we have a lot of folks who are hired at step one and are still at step one, because step plans were, the board opted to eliminate step plans a number of years ago. And so people who are hired at step one, the only increase they're getting is when there's a COLA, a lift to the scale. And as I said, we have done it a little bit. We haven't done as much as we'd want. Ideally, what we would have is we have lifted scales, and then you have tracking of where people are within the scales. And that's where I'm really looking forward to hearing how Siegel comes back, some of the recommendations they have for how we can sort of have a more modern program for our class comp structure that people understand, because part of it is, a lot of it's going to be communication as well. The other thing, looking at this, and this gets to the question that often comes up about, well, we have too many administrators, and we went through the number of positions that we closed down. But there's the IPEDS, which is the national database for tracking all kinds of information that's related to colleges and universities. They have position information, and we can measure ourselves versus other institutions versus how they have positions classified. But the classification there is not the same as what the college's administrator classification is. And what they call is management. So it goes down for us, it goes down to the director level, and I think even some of the advanced program managers. So it goes into the exempt schedule in our world, but they have managerial responsibilities. And we have done metrics versus peer institutions in the past, and we updated them with more recent IPEDS information to sort of make sure, are we top heavy, right? Because the implication is always that we're top heavy, and the data actually does not suggest that. And this is a measure, and the IPEDS data is a couple of years old, so we're actually probably even a little bit better than this because of what we've done recently. But this shows what the management level positions are compared to, there's two different slides. One is compared to as a percentage of salaries and wages to total expenses. And then the next one is showing the number of employees, so the percentage of employees that are in those categories. And I will point out that a couple of these institutions are outliers because structurally they're different. So Mesa Community College, which you'd say is kind of a peer institution in terms of total size, is actually, they are understated in this because their district office administrator positions do not show up in this. So it's actually, they would be quite a bit higher. And we did that measure a couple of years ago with Maricopa, and their management positions per employee or per every measure that you'd look at, it was considerably higher than ours. So we actually are relatively lean and responsible when you talk about what our management level positions are. And we'll continue to track on this and use in the class comp study. One of the things is looking at some of those director level positions is should we come up with a different classification for things and talk about things a little differently going forward. But again, this is a conversation for the future. Okay, shifting a little bit to the strategic plan. And so basically with the strategic initiatives that come out of the plan, there are two ways that we handle it. And this is also similar to how we do the capital budget, is that we have money set aside within the operational budget that if something pops up mid-year, we don't have to wait to the next year to be able to do it. If there's a good idea, we have actually a process called the strategic initiative process where folks will say, this is part of the strategic plan, or we need to increase this cost. We need to provide this additional, get this new software for student services. And we can't wait till the next budget cycle. And they put in a request and we can get that happening during the year. If that's above board threshold, that will still go through the board, but there is a process by which that gets vetted and we can actually trigger that expense. We don't have to wait for the next budget year to get approval for those things. And that's how most of the strategic initiatives get funded. If it's a capital need or a grant, there are different ways that we handle that. And capital needs, again, I talked the other day about how we have contingency set aside. We can reallocate some resources because we're talking about that whole budget is a capacity document. We can refine what our needs are going to be for the year. And if there's a higher priority that pops up through strategic needs, or by the way, urgent and emergent needs, something breaks down, there are ways to fund those up during the year. We're not stuck in this weird cycle where you wait a year. And then because we do an annual budget process, it actually doesn't take too long before the next budget year where we can fold it in and show the board, here's our strategic priority for the year. And as we talked about the other day, enhancing the student services and student success type programming were some of the priorities that we were able to fold in the year. So those are the things that I wanted to make sure. I put a number of other slides in there for your reference that you can take a look at. Most of those are based on our financial report. So they're going back to what's concluded in the most recent fiscal year, so through fiscal year 20. But those are really important to measure and keep an eye on those metrics as we go through the year, because those are the things that make sure that we're sustaining ourselves, or we're continuing on a trend that is sustainable and healthy and good stewardship of our public resources. So with that, I'll ask if the board has any questions, and actually what we really would like to get is some feedback related to the compensation that we have folded into the budget.
Are there any comments from the board? Yes. Yeah.
So let me just bring up some points, Dave, that unless some board member has questions about the compensation.
I have a question. I'd like you to speak first.
Okay. So we've been talking a lot the last 2 days, Dave, about some of the priorities and funding those priorities, maybe making trade-offs. And so I think being able to illustrate that in a future discussion so that we have a better sense of what some of those trade-offs are. I think some of it's reflected in the designated funds. So that's one piece. Second piece is I also talked about how the overall budget, how it's allocated by instruction versus academic support, student services, instructional support, and operation and management. So roughly, I believe about 50% of the general and designated funds is in instruction when you count academic support. And then the rest is just kind of divided out in those other categories. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
Yeah, well, and actually, and that was brought up as a point that the growth in institutional support is identified as a concerning trend. I believe was the phrase was something like that, and particularly when you're looking at the general fund, as Lee was talking about, I think that's a better measure of what the proportions are. And instruction, like I like to think of it as actually instruction, academic support, and student services. So those are really the student facing expenses that we have as an institution. Those are the majority of the expenses for sure. And then the remainder, the institutional support, which is sort of the administrative functions, and then plant are the other, and scholarships is one of them, but again, that's a little bit different. One of the things that also was mentioned with the concerning trend is that the way, when you look at all funds, it also includes the capital projects that have been specifically coded for those projects. So if we're doing some major enhancement to our IT infrastructure, which we are, it's going to actually show up as an increase in the IT expenses in the institutional support category. That doesn't mean that it's just going to general administrative service. It's going to what's critical for the institution to provide the resources to the college. And it's critical in that case, very critical for the kind of academic programs that we're going to be offering in the future.
Questions? Yeah.
No, I just wanted to voice my opinion and concern, but I think that Chancellor Lambert voiced that, and that is our discussion in the last couple of days has been surrounding bolstering communications and marketing in the spirit of enrollment and increasing enrollment and retention and recruitment. So I'm guessing that we will at some point get not a crazy detailed line item of your budget, but an idea of how we might bolster those departments, and or that's just going to come out of that discretionary $2 million fund, strategic initiative fund.
Right. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's actually another good example that it's something that I think we all recognize as critical. But that would be also something that's going to increase the institutional support line, because that's where those get categorized. But we have got to compete for students, and we've got to find a way to get students who either stopped out, dropped out, have found a different way in their life, and we got to get them back in here. And again, I'm really optimistic because there are a lot of the federal initiatives, the state, even the state now is prioritizing trying to get people back to college and to the old adult ed programs. So, I think we're going to have some help now trying to get people to recognize the value of higher education. But we do need to bump up our marketing for sure.
Yeah, Dr. Beek, one of the things you noted earlier was the Prop 207 money. And I just want to be cognizant that we don't just absorb that into the general fund, that we actually think strategically about how we can utilize that funding to really advance some of these key initiatives. And it just doesn't, because I've seen, we can see how quickly in such little increases, millions of dollars just disappear into the system. So to really be thoughtful, I think that community colleges were included in that. Because it was seen as an offset to sort of the social aspect of it. So I think we have a responsibility to really be very, very nuanced in how we utilize that money for the highest possible impact for the institution, and not just how it gets vacuumed into the system. So I want to keep that in mind because of that money just coming. So we can have a conversation about it.
So Dave, I think what you're hearing is there's some strategic priorities that the board would like to set. We want to make sure that we can designate appropriate resources to those strategic priorities, but then be able to track that funding actually went instead of just being absorbed into the larger universe. I know we have already do that with the designated fund category. And that way, that 10 million possibility doesn't just get sucked up. That it's actually going to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, we can do that. And one of the things that we're going to do with 481 is have a tracking mechanism for the things that we were able to do within the budget that are consistent with what we said with 481. And part of that is making sure that we have coding and ways to show here's the value that we were able to provide because of that. I think that's important to the community too. And this one would be similar to tracking what the board's priorities are and the effectiveness of those. That sounds like a great idea.
What he's talking about is we're going to create a dashboard against the 481 priorities that we told the community, and then we'll be able to show the community, this is where that flexibility, what we did with those resources.
And the same for when 207
Yes,
starts to
yes,
trickle
exactly.
in, we'll have a plan and an idea of how we spend them. And then this is how we spend it. Similar to the great job y'all did with the COVID money. It was very, very distinct where that money went, and it was transparent, and it was super.
So to Dr. B's question about compensation, is there any other feedback on that? Okay, so everybody's generally comfortable with the proposal as presented. This is how it's going to come.
Yeah, I'm comfortable as long as you follow up with the PCC EA offline, Dr. B.
And the day of relief as well. That seems a concept that is okay.
Great job, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Bye, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Yes.
Thank you, Andrea. You did an awesome job.
Yes. Thanks for.